Be angry, but sin not. So that's a righteous indignation. But the second part of that verse says, but don't go to sleep angry. Don't let the sun set with that anger. So it's 10:30 right now. The sun is up. I'm angry, but it's a righteous indignation that's going to be connected to love and justice. We're going to see how those connected dots. So I know some of y'all are thinking, what are you angry about? I have a lot to be angry about. But what I'm angry about for this conversation are a few things that you're going to see how I connect the dots, hopefully, on, that you may think are disparate and they don't go together. But it's going to be an eclectic mix of things that I'm angry about that I'm going to show you the stream of consciousness belong. So the first thing I'm angry about is diversity. I'm highly upset with diversity. The second thing I'm angry about is the church. I'm highly upset with the church. The third thing I'm angry about is Christian higher education. I'm drastically unsettled by the state of things in Christian higher education. And the fourth thing I'm angry about is hip-hop culture. I'm really upset with hip-hop culture. And why I'm upset with all those things is because they all have transformative powers to make us better in our societies, better in our communities and institutions, etc. But they get co-opted. They get market messages. And anything that's controlled by the market has a fetish for profit. And it loses its soul, its spirit, and its focus because it gets so controlled with making money. I'm going to get back to all of this. But I'm going to start off with diversity because I may not get to anything else. I'm going to start off with diversity. I can't stand diversity, to be totally honest. Multicultural education, all those kind of challenges. Cultural competency, intercultural communication. I'm mad. I'm mad because for the most part they're co-opted. They have no lineage to the history of how they emerged, the time and space that shaped them. So we focus on the superficial. We're more concerned with representation. We're less concerned with power redistribution. We turn multicultural celebrations into potlucks and fiestas instead of looking at the structural inequalities that frame the reasons why certain cultures exist. So stay with me on the timeline a little bit. I'm also mad about diversity because, for the most part, people get mad. When you hear diversity, the first thing that comes into folks' mind is race. Why are we still talking about race? It's 2013. We have a black president. We don't see slavery is illegal. We don't see the KKK. Why are we focused on race still in America? Let me tell you why. Because from 1492 to 1865, there was legalized slavery in America. From 1492 to 1865, there was legalized slavery in America. And not only was it legalized slavery in that insidious act, it shaped who we are as a society. It shaped our values, our ideals, our beliefs, our behaviors. It shaped the economy, our churches, our educational institutions, our political sphere. It created reality that is known as the United States of America. And then in 1865, we had the Emancipation Proclamation and all the work that Lincoln did. So they abolished slavery. But just because you abolish a system doesn't mean you abolish thoughts and behaviors and views and values and interests. So slavery is illegal, but folks who are historically slaves still don't have rights. They never got their 40 acres and a mule that was promised. But what makes it even worse, if slavery is abolished in 1865, but in 1896, there is a Supreme Court decision, a landmark decision called Plessy versus Ferguson, that legalized segregation. So slavery is ended, but legalized segregation is part and parcel of the American experience. Which means what? I can tell you, you can't come to my church, you can't come to my store, you can't come to my restaurant, you can't come to my school, you cannot come to any type of public space based on your ethnic background. And that's okay. As a matter of fact, in certain pockets of the world, it's actually, or in the U.S., it's actually supported. So from 1896 to 1954, there's legalized segregation. From 1492 to 1865, it's slavery. And from 1865 to 1896, before legalized segregation, there's lynchings. There's public terror on groups of people in America. But in 1954, we changed something. Another landmark decision. Brown versus the Board of Education. It says no. Segregation is illegal. We can no longer discriminate against people based on their race, etc. And if we do, there will be consequences. So what starts to happen now? 1954. Schools that have historically said we are not opening up our doors to black and brown people, they have to open up their doors. It's the law. So now you have the civil rights movement, you've got all these political things that are going on in society, and predominantly white institutions have to open up their doors to black and brown folks. So when they started opening up their doors, they started to realize we got some problems here. We are not structured in a way to meet the needs of this changing demographic of folks. So through all this social turmoil, the civil rights movement, fighting against the laws that were after Brown versus Board of Education to make sure that every student who was coming into K-12 schools and colleges were having the right experience, multicultural education started to emerge. Writers, educators, scholars started to formalize something we call multicultural education. And multicultural education was structured and formed as not an attempt to get folks of color in schools, because they were already there. It was a focus on how do we address their lived realities once they get here. And now we're in 2013 in Christian higher education. And they think multicultural education is getting folks of color in the door. Newsflash, we've been here. We need to rethink the work we do. So you got, this is what's going on. So 1954, we got Brown versus Board of Education. It makes segregation illegal. 1960s, late 1960s, a formalized version of multicultural education starts to metastasize itself throughout schools, throughout society, and the focus was on curriculum reform, environmental transformation, making sure the faculty and staff represented the demographic of the folks that they were serving. Again, no one was trying to make students of color coming in the focus, because they were already there. The political landscape shifted. Then you had other kind of groups starting to get in with this, right? The women's movement. Like the 70s happened. 1973, Paulo Freire releases the seminal text Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which drastically looked at the way we do education, and how education and the way it is structured was dehumanizing to poor people and people of color. It made the central argument that schools never were, nor are they now structured to benefit the least of these. Unless we are intentional about deconstructing that reality, we will reinforce marginalization with well-intentions. Period. That's what Papa Freire was talking about. And then it started to open up. Because then you have in the 70s, the Disabilities Act. It's making sure that everybody who traditionally were underserved and interests were not met in schools, we had to put pressure on the schools to meet their needs. But somehow, in 2013, we've lost focus. We've lost our path. And the reason why we've lost our path is because you cannot separate diversity or multicultural education from justice. You cannot do it. Right? So if you only focus on diversity and you only focus on multicultural education, the superficial terms that have been co-opted by dominant culture, you will get things like a focus on racial composition. But when you add justice to the equation, not only do you look at racial composition, you look at power redistribution. You look at the lived realities of the people who are suffering. And you look at the structural and the systemic forces that create their suffering. And then you center their voices. You make sure they're part and parcel of the conversation. They're not just a group that you provide services to or for. They're part of the conversation that shape their reality. Y'all still with me? I'm angry still, but it's a righteous indignation. Let me tell you something. You quote me on this. Separating justice from diversity is equivalent to separating love from Jesus. You can't have one without the other. Because guess what? You separate love from Jesus, what you're going to get is dogma. You're going to get personal interest, self-interest. You're only going to look for ways for your values to be affirmed. Cornel West says something so great. He says, justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. So I am challenging us. I'm imploring us to think differently about this work, to engage it very differently. I have a few more minutes. I don't know. Gosh, time flies when you're having fun. So what does that mean for Warner Pacific College? Because I'm not just leaving you all with some stuff that's unsettling. There's actually a pathway we've developed to meet the needs. Somebody show the diagram of that we created. So when I started here, there was no such thing as an Office of Diversity. There was no framework, there was no theory, there was no way to encapsulate the work that we want to do in our office. So, in a nutshell, what I decided to do, I'm a theorist by training. My doctorate is in education, but I'm an educational theorist. I approach everything from a theoretical space. I'm trying to complicate things and figure out why we are where we are and how culture impacts that. So what do we try to do? In Office of Diversity. So I developed a 5-point conceptual framework that organizes the work that we do. One is multicultural education. You can't do this work without knowing where we are, where we came from, why we do it, how we do it, and all the different frameworks and ideas that chart its path forward. Second is multicultural programming. It's not enough to think about it and theorize it. We have to offer you consistent programs and events and opportunities to think critically about the work that we do. The third thing is providing an equitable campus climate and culture. And what I want everybody to focus on that equitable campus climate and culture is this work is for everybody. But I'm mad because hip-hop is either pathologized or romanticized. What are you talking about? It's only discussed in extremes. It's pathologized because of its conversation around materialism and misogyny and all these kind of things. But those are mainstream marketing messages that have been commodified for profit.